So, welcome to Education and Technology Today. I'm Richard Smith,
And I'm Caroline Crawford.
and today we're talking about ways to help students retain the information that they are taught in either an e-learning course or a face-to-face course.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So, one of the methods that I'm thinking about is putting in interactive elements in the course.
Meaning,
Well, meaning the idea, if you're on an e-learning course or even a face-to-face course, instead of straight lecture, and of course, very rarely do we do straight lecture now, but that the discussion groups are an important part of the process. Asking questions as as the class progresses is an important part. That's an interactive idea.
I didn't know if you meant integrating community components, integrating simulation type environments, gaming.
Yes, and things like that also. That's
Video conferencing.
somewhat more sophisticated. I don't know about community components when you're teaching a class, but certainly if you're doing gaming in a class, that would be fine. Whether it's a game on a computer, a simulation, or you can of course get together and do gamings in a role playing situation, or role playing itself is an example of that.
Absolutely. I think it's a great idea. And depending upon who the learners are, integrating their real-world experiences, whether we're talking about K-12 environment, integrating their hobbies and skill sets, or for people who are at the adult level, not only hobbies and skill sets, but also real-world work environments, their career paths. How can this learning environment experience enhance their professional life as well?
Yeah, and that's it. But that's a tricky one because if they're adults, they might be in several different professions in one class. You might have people who are in profession A, profession B, profession C. So
Depends on the subject matter, though.
yes, but in order to make that lesson relevant to all of them, you have to be fairly sophisticated to do that.
Well, it should be an enhanced level of knowledge attainment and implementation.
Well, I think
if you're talking about it in Bloom's taxonomy at the very low level knowledge base, yes, you have to ensure that the knowledge base is intact and appropriately framed, and then slowly moving up towards higher order thinking skills, where the highest might be creativity if we're looking at Anderson and Krathwohl's.
Well, I'm thinking of a task such as, well, you've just taught something and you say, okay, I want you either individually or in groups, get in groups with like-minded people, see how you can apply this information to your workplace.
We're talking past each other.
I think it's a little simpler getting into an esoteric discussion of all these taxonomies and what have you. But speaking of taxonomies, another thing that can be done to keep the information, help the students retain the information, is not to overload them with information.
I have an issue with that. Just in the way I design courses, mainly because they're graduate level courses, I offer significant levels of information to ensure that they have numerous ways of viewing the information as well as framing it for them appropriately. Because they have the textual readings, they have the framing of the information within the course environment, then we have external links that are recommended, as well as different types of video-based information. If we're talking about learning theories, the theorists who frame the different theories or models, I integrate those videos, the videos of the actual theorists speaking, to have an idea of their thought process.
Well, I never talk about those theorists, but what I do is I simply make each unit of information as small as possible without losing the essence of what is being taught. So if it takes 3 or 4 sections to teach something rather than 3 or 4 smaller sections to teach something rather than one longer session, I'll do that because it makes it easier to, in my opinion, for the students to grasp that information.
To understand the knowledge, to implement it within memory functions, implicit memory, moving from short-term memory to long-term memory, but also cognitive load concerns, where if you're trying to learn too much information at one time, all of a sudden, poof, I can't remember a darn thing. It all goes out of my brain. It happens to me too. If this is new information and I haven't learned before, if I take it, it takes me longer to take in the information because I'm thinking it through, as any learner would.
Another thing that can be done is the frequent use of quizzes and exams. Now, normally you think of this as something where the instructor would figure out how well the students have learned the information. But in essence, if you have a lot of quizzes in your course, it becomes like a practice technique or a practice method on the part of the students.
Well, is it a knowledge check or is it a graded component?
Well, definitely
Is
with
it a significant level of assessment or is it a knowledge check that the instructor desires to have the learner engage so as to figure out what needs to be focused upon for the reteach effort or enhancement effort?
I don't generally reteach, but what I'll do is to use those tests to make certain that the students are concentrating on learning a certain level of knowledge that will support the concepts that I'm teaching. So the more frequently I do this, the more the students are forced to concentrate on the facts that are being taught, and that increases their ability to retain the information that's being taught.
I agree with you about the knowledge check, and if a student is off base on some type of knowledge attainment, it's an opportunity for you to double check and go back in and find out what might be going on and how to enhance it appropriately for the learner too.
And another thing that can be used effectively to help knowledge retention is the use of stories within a course.
Oh, I love storytelling. It's so much easier to remember something when someone frames it through a story.
And how would you frame? Do you have an example of how you've done that in a course?
I was thinking about little stories that people share about the little quirky things. For example, oh gosh, we were talking about one yesterday. We were talking about online etiquette in one of the classes and designing and developing an online course and framing the concept of online etiquette within it. And I was sharing a story about looking at Rate My Professor, I guess it was, and looking at the commentary within that framework, and then looking at some comments focused upon YouTube videos and the differentiation. And isn't that interesting? And I wonder why the feedback would be so significantly different if it's a relational issue, relationship issue between the person offering the evaluation and myself, or if it's the anonymity that comes from an online comment or evaluation, or if there really is some type of interesting intellectual or social concern going on. It's so interesting, the differentiation in the way that we all communicate.
I agree.
Actually, that kind of engaged a stronger discussion of the topic. Most of it was very much level, yes, I understand, and then personalizing the information seems to engage the learner significantly further. And I remember stories better. I remember information better when the stories are engaging and mean something to me, and it tunes me into the information that someone is trying to share.
And one other item before we close out, the use of avatars to explain information. I think that is something like it's a little hook that can be used to draw students' attention to particular parts of the course and to act as sort of like a link between the instructor and the students if the instructor does not want to appear face to face. And of course, one might say, well, why wouldn't the instructor want to appear face to face in an online course? Well, there's one very good reason for that. If the course is designed to be taught by a variety of instructors or adjuncts, you wouldn't want to have the person who designed that course have his or her face on a video saying, explaining things to the students. But if you have an avatar, an animated avatar,
That's a good point.
it would be much more advantageous, and also, if used well, will guide the students to the information that they should retain, and thus help them retain that information.
As well as just simple tips and tricks that perhaps the instructor has learned to make the job easier, to make moving through the course easier. Or even framing the course information at the very beginning of one of my courses. I always had a silly little slideshow, but then I'd offer a little lecture overview of it in half an hour, 15 minutes, half an hour tops, for the learners if they chose to review it. And I had such positive feedback about that. Thanks so much for framing it. It made so much more sense after I viewed your video. And because those comments were public within the course venue, a lot of the other students who just, oh yeah, whatever, a video, I don't need to read that, this is the information, all of a sudden started watching it, and the grades started going up. It was really interesting. It can be used in several different ways, but absolutely.
I agree. And
The
yes,
engagement, the primary focus within an online, especially an online course, is the engagement within the community. And it's vitally important, especially to feel a connection with whomever the facilitator may be.
I agree. And we've reached the end of another edition of Technology and Education Today. For Technology and Education Today, I'm Richard Smith.
And I'm Caroline Crawford. Bye.